The wind smelled like rain that hadn't fallen yet. I remember that more than anything, standing on the porch of my father's house in a dress that wasn't mine to choose, lacing up boots that pinched at the heel, watching the dust rise off the road where in 2 hours half the territory would arrive to watch me marry a man I didn't love. Jesse Coltrane was kneeling in the dirt behind the barn, fixing a wheel that didn't need fixing. He always found something to fix when he didn't know what to do with his hands. I walked out to him before anyone could stop me. I didn't even know what I was going to say until I said it. "Whoever marries you," I told him, "will be lucky." He didn't look up right away. The hammer stopped. The whole world seemed to stop with it. Then he stood, slow, like a man getting up from a long sleep, and he looked at me with eyes the color of creek water in October, and he said the 7 words that took the floor under my life. "I was hoping it would be you." Now, before I tell you how that morning ended, you need to understand something. That moment didn't come out of nowhere. It came from 6 years of silence, 1 broken promise, a debt that wasn't mine, and a man I was about to marry who was not who he said he was. So let me take you back. Let me tell you how a boy who left without saying goodbye became the only man I ever trusted, and how I almost married the one man in the territory who never deserved me at all. If you've ever loved someone you weren't supposed to, you're gonna want to stay for this one. My name's Eliza Calloway. This is my story.
I was 11 years old the first time Jesse Coltrane pulled me out of the Cimarron River. I'd gone in after my hat, a stupid, vain little thing, blue ribbon, my mother's last gift to me before the fever took her, and the current was stronger than I'd judged. By the time Jesse's father shouted from the bank, I was already past the bend, swallowing more river than air. Jesse was 13, skinny as a fence post, all elbows and nerve. He didn't think. He just went in after me, grabbed a fistful of my collar, and hauled us both to a sandbar like it was nothing at all. We lay there coughing up the Cimarron, and when I could finally breathe right, I asked him why he did it. "Couldn't let you drown over a hat," he said. Then, quieter, like he was embarrassed to mean it, "Didn't want you to go." That was Jesse. He never said much, but what he said, he meant down to the bone. For 5 years after that, we were inseparable in the way only children on a hard, lonely frontier can be. His family's homestead sat 2 miles east of ours, close enough that I could see their chimney smoke from my window. We built forts in the cottonwoods. We raced horses we weren't supposed to ride. We sat on his father's roof at night and named stars we were probably naming wrong. I never once thought of him as anything but mine, not in the way a girl thinks of a sweetheart, in the way you think of your own hand, your own heartbeat, something so constant you forget to be grateful for it. Then the drought came. It was 1878, the year the rain forgot us. The Coltrane land turned to powder. Their cattle dropped where they stood. I watched Jesse's father age 10 years in 10 months, watched the lines carve into his face like dry creek beds. In the fall, the bank took what the drought hadn't. I remember the morning they left. Jesse didn't come to say goodbye, not properly. I found him at the edge of our property line, loading the last of his family's belongings onto a wagon that looked too small to hold a whole life. "Where are you going?" I asked. "Don't know yet," he said. "West, maybe, wherever there's work." I was 16, he was 18, and I said something foolish, something a girl says when she doesn't yet understand that some goodbyes are forever. "Write to me." He looked at me a long moment, long enough that I felt it in my chest, a kind of ache I didn't have a name for yet. "I will," he said. He didn't. Not one letter in 6 years, not a word. I told myself I'd stopped waiting. I was lying. Here's something nobody tells you about growing up on the frontier. The land doesn't wait for your heart to heal. It just keeps demanding things of you. By the time I was 22, my father, Eliza Calloway, had built our ranch into one of the steadiest spreads in the county. 600 head of cattle, good water rights, a name people respected. But steady isn't the same as safe.
2 bad winters and a railroad spur that bypassed our valley had eaten into everything he'd built. He didn't tell me how bad it was. Fathers like mine never do. I found out the way most daughters find out, by accident and far too late. It was April when my father's horse threw him. He survived, but his hip never set right, and a man who can't sit his saddle can't run 600 head of cattle, not alone, not even close. We needed help, real help, someone who knew cattle, knew land, knew how to run a ranch through a man's worst season. My father put out word through 3 counties. I was in the kitchen, elbow deep in dishwater, when I heard boots on the porch and my father's voice carry through the screen door. Surprised, then warm, then almost disbelieving. Coltrane? Jesse Coltrane, that you? My hands went still in the water. I told myself it couldn't be. 6 years is a long time. People change, move on, become strangers wearing familiar names. I dried my hands on my apron and walked to the door anyway, and there he was. He'd grown into himself the way a sapling grows into a tree you don't recognize until it's towering over you. Broader through the shoulders, a scar above his left eyebrow that hadn't been there before, with a story behind it I didn't know yet. But the eyes? The eyes were exactly the same. Creek water in October. Lizzie, he said. Just that. My name, like he'd been saving it for 6 years and was almost afraid to spend it. You never wrote, I said. It wasn't what I meant to say. It was the only thing that came out. Something moved behind his face. Guilt, maybe, or grief, or both tangled together so tight he couldn't separate them. No, I didn't. I'm sorry, Lizzie. There's a reason. I'll tell you, just not today. I should have pushed. I should have demanded the truth right there on the porch. I didn't, because my father needed a foreman, and the best one in 3 counties had just walked back into my life with a secret behind his eyes. And against every ounce of sense I had, I was glad he was home. Jesse moved into the bunkhouse that same week. I want to be honest with you about something. Those first weeks were not romantic. They were awkward and careful and full of silences neither of us knew how to fill. We'd been children together. Now we were strangers who happened to share a history, circling each other across a kitchen table, across a corral fence, like 2 people who'd once spoken a language they'd both have forgotten. But Jesse worked. Lord, did he work. Up before dawn, last lantern out at night. He knew cattle the way some men knew scripture, by instinct, by feel, by years of hard-won understanding. Within a month, my father trusted him with decisions he wouldn't have trusted to a man twice Jesse's age. And I watched him. I couldn't help it. I watched him gentle a green colt that had thrown 2 other hands, talking low and steady until the animal's ears stopped pinning back. I watched him carry feed sacks on a shoulder that still bore the faint white line of an old injury he never explained. I watched him sit with my father some evenings, the 2 of them talking cattle prices and rainfall, and I'd catch Jesse looking toward the kitchen window when he thought no one was watching. I was watching, Jesse. I always was. One evening in May, I found him at the corral fence after supper, forearms crossed over the top rail, watching the horses graze in that long gold light you only get on the prairie in early summer. You gonna tell me where you went? Those 6 years? He was quiet long enough that I thought he wouldn't answer. Texas first, then New Mexico Territory. Drove cattle, broke horses, worked a copper claim for a season that near killed me. He touched the scar above his eyebrow without seeming to notice he'd done it. Got into some trouble I'm not proud of, in a town called Cresswell, trouble I had to outrun. What kind of trouble? The kind I'll tell you about when I trust myself not to lie about the parts that shame me. He owed me better than a story I've prettied up for myself. It wasn't an answer, but it was an honest non-answer, and somehow that meant more. Why didn't you write? I asked again, the question that had been sitting in my chest for 6 years, like a stone I couldn't swallow or spit out. He turned to look at me then, really look, and the gold light caught the side of his face. "Because every letter I started," he said, "turned into something I had no right to send a 16-year-old girl, and by the time I was old enough to write you the letter I should have, I figured too much time had passed, and you'd have moved on, and the kindest thing I could do was let you." "That wasn't your decision to make," I said, and I was surprised by how much heat was in my voice. "No," he agreed, "it wasn't. I've regretted it every day since." We stood there at that fence rail a long moment, the horses moving like slow shadows in the gold light, and something passed between us that I didn't have a word for yet. Not anger, not quite forgiveness, something rawer and more honest than either. That was the night I understood I was in serious trouble, because the boy who pulled me from the river had become a man I could fall in love with all over again, and I had absolutely no right to. Because 3 weeks earlier, my father had promised my hand to another man entirely. His name was Thomas Whitfield, and on paper, he was exactly the kind of man a struggling rancher's daughter was supposed to marry. His father, Cornelius Whitfield, owned the largest cattle operation in the territory and held the note on half the smaller ranches in the county, including, as I learned that spring, a significant portion of ours. Thomas was handsome in the practiced way of a man who'd been told he was handsome since boyhood. He had good manners, a fine horse, and a smile that arrived a half-second too quickly to ever feel quite real. My father called me into his study on a Sunday afternoon in March, before Jesse had returned, and told me, gently but in a way that made clear it wasn't a discussion, that Cornelius Whitfield had proposed a match between me and Thomas, and that he'd agreed to it. "It would settle things, Lizzie," my father said, not quite meeting my eyes. "The note, the drought debt, all of it. Whitfield's offered to forgive what we owe as part of the arrangement." "You're selling me. The note." "I'm trying to save this ranch," my father said, and the pain in his voice was real enough that I couldn't hate him for it, even as something in my chest cracked clean in half. I said yes, not because I wanted to, because I understood, even at 22, that love is a luxury and survival is not, and on the frontier, survival wins more often than the songs would have you believe. The wedding was set for late June, 3 months. Then Jesse came home in April, and every certainty I'd made peace with came apart at the seams. I want to tell you I was honest with Thomas about my feelings. I wasn't, not because I'm proud of the silence, but because there was nothing yet to be honest about. A feeling I hadn't named, a man I'd known since I was 11. What was I supposed to say, that the hired hand made my chest ache in a way my fiancé never had? But I noticed things about Thomas that spring that I hadn't let myself notice before. The way his eyes moved when he talked about our land, not like a man admiring a view, but like a man taking inventory. The way he asked more than once exactly how many head of cattle we ran, exactly which sections had water rights, exactly what the boundary lines were with the Coltranes 2 miles east, land that technically was now part of the bank's holdings since the Coltranes had lost it. I told myself I was imagining things. I told myself a woman about to marry a man for practical reasons goes looking for reasons to resent him, and that I should be ashamed of my suspicion. I was wrong to doubt my own instincts. I just didn't know that yet. If you've ever worked alongside someone you love and aren't allowed to love, you know there's a particular kind of ache to it, sweeter and crueler than almost anything else. That's what the next 2 months were for me. Jesse and I worked the ranch side by side nearly every day, moving cattle, mending fence, riding the boundary lines at dawn when the light turned everything the color of a struck match. We talked about everything and nothing, books we'd both half read, the strange shapes clouds made over the ridge, my mother, who Jesse remembered with a tenderness that undid me every time, because so few people did anymore. We never once spoke about Thomas. We never once spoke about the wedding. It sat between us on every ride, every fence line, every shared canteen of water, an unspoken thing too large to name and too large to ignore. I caught him watching me sometimes when he thought I wasn't looking, the same way I watched him. And once, just once, in late May, our hands brushed, passing a coil of fencing wire, and neither of us moved away as fast as we should have. "Lizzie," he said, low, and there was something in his voice I'd never heard from him before, something close to begging. "Don't," I said, and I meant it as much for myself as for him. "Please, Jesse, don't say something we can't take back." He nodded, jaw tight, and stepped back, and we didn't speak of it again for weeks. But I started noticing him noticing things too. The way he watched Thomas during the rare visits Thomas paid the ranch, not with jealousy, but with something sharper: calculation, suspicion. "You don't like him," I said to Jesse one evening, after Thomas had ridden off following a visit where he'd spent more time examining our cattle brands than speaking to me. "I don't trust him," Jesse corrected. "There's a difference." "Why not?" Jesse was quiet a moment, choosing his words the careful way he chose everything. He said finally, "In my travels, I learned to read men the way I read weather, and there's something in Thomas Whitfield that reminds me of a sky I've seen turn ugly fast. I can't prove anything, Lizzie. I just know how that sky feels before the storm hits." I told myself he was jealous. I told myself that of course Jesse would find fault with the man marrying the woman he... What? I didn't even let myself finish the thought. But the truth was, some small, quiet part of me had been feeling that same ugly sky feeling for weeks. I just hadn't had the courage to listen to it. That courage would cost us both before the summer was through. The stampede happened on the 2nd of June, 3 weeks before my wedding, and it very nearly killed me. We'd moved 400 head to the north pasture for better grazing, and a summer storm rolled in faster than any of us judged. Black clouds stacking up over the ridge like something building toward a verdict. Thunder cracked close, too close, and the herd's nerve broke at all once. I was on the eastern flank when they ran. 600 pounds of frightened animal multiplied 400 times, a wall of muscle and horn thundering straight toward the gully where my horse had stumbled on loose shale. I went down hard. My horse scrambled up and bolted, and I was on the ground, in the path of a stampede, with no time and no good options, and the sound of my own heartbeat louder than the thunder. Jesse told me later he didn't remember deciding anything, he just remembered moving. He came off the ridge at a dead run, leaning so far over his horse's neck I'm told it looked like he and the animal had become one creature. He reached me with seconds, maybe less, to spare, hauled me up onto the saddle in front of him with one arm, like I weighed nothing at all, and turned that horse hard enough to nearly put us both on the ground a second time, cutting across the stampede's path instead of trying to outrun it. We made the gully wall with the herd's dust still choking the air behind us. My heart was going so hard I could feel it in my teeth. Jesse's arms were locked around me, and neither of us let go for a long moment after the danger had passed, longer than safety required, and we both knew it. "You're all right," he said into my hair, more like a prayer than a statement. "You're all right. I've got you." "You came after me," I said, shaking. "Jesse," he pulled back just enough to look at me, and his eyes were wrecked in a way I'd never seen on him before, not even the day his family lost everything. I knew, sitting there in the mud, with the storm still rumbling overhead, that I was no longer capable of marrying Thomas Whitfield without breaking something in myself that might never mend. I also knew the wedding was 17 days away, the debt forgiveness was the only thing standing between my father and ruin, and there was nothing I could do about either fact. That night, lying awake, I made a decision that still shames me a little even now. I decided to bury what I felt for Jesse Coltrane as deep as I could manage and marry Thomas Whitfield anyway, because my father's whole life's work depended on it.
I didn't yet know that decision was about to become entirely unnecessary because the ground under that engagement was a great deal less solid than any of us understood.
It was my father's old friend, a circuit accountant named Ezra Pruitt, who first put the doubt in my head, though he didn't mean to. Ezra came through every summer to look over the ranch books, a habit left over from my mother's time. He arrived 8 days before the wedding, settled into the study with my father's ledgers, and by the second evening his face had gone the particular gray of a man who's found something he wishes he hadn't. I found him alone in the study that night, the ledger open under the lamp, his finger tracing the same column of figures over and over. "Eliza," he said, not looking up, "did your father tell you the exact terms of the note forgiveness, the Whitfield arrangement?" "Just that he was told the debt would be cleared upon the marriage," I said. "That's what he was told," Ezra said carefully, "but I've been comparing these figures to the county recorder's filings. Eliza, the note your father owes the Whitfields isn't the only note on this land." My stomach went cold. "What do you mean?" "I mean there's a second lien, filed 11 months ago against the same acreage, the water rights specifically, held under a name I don't recognize, a holding company, Cresswell Mineral and Land." Cresswell, the town Jesse had mentioned, the trouble he'd outrun, the thing he hadn't yet trusted himself to explain. My hands had gone cold and strange, like they belonged to someone else. "If this second lien is called in," Ezra continued, "it wouldn't matter that the Whitfields forgive their note. Whoever holds the Cresswell lien could claim the water rights outright. And without water rights, Eliza, this ranch isn't worth the paper your father's deed is written on." "Who would do that?" I asked. "Who would buy a lien on land they didn't already have a claim to?" Ezra looked at me, and I watched him arrive at the same terrible thought I was arriving at in the same instant. "Someone," he said slowly, "who needed very sure this ranch had no choice but to accept whatever terms were offered. Someone who needed your father desperate enough to agree to anything, including a marriage that would put the remaining asset, the land itself, fully under Whitfield control, regardless of what happened to the first note." I sat down because my legs no longer felt entirely reliable. "You think Thomas did this?" I said. "I think," Ezra said, "that I need to ride to the county seat at first light and find out exactly who incorporated Cresswell Mineral and Land before your father signs anything else away." 7 days before my wedding, I went looking for Jesse with a question I was terrified to ask, because some part of me had already guessed the answer would tear my entire world in half. And I was right. I found him at the corral in the dark, unable to sleep. Same as me. "Cresswell," I said, before I'd even reached the fence. "Tell me about Cresswell, Jesse. Right now. All of it." He went very still. "Where'd you hear that name?" "There's a lien on our water rights," I said, my voice shaking in a way I hated. "Filed under a company called Cresswell Mineral and Land, 11 months ago, the same town you ran from." For a long moment, Jesse said nothing, and the silence told me more than I wanted to know. The trouble I had in Cresswell was a man named Augustus Reed. I worked a copper claim of his for a season, found out partway through that he was running a scheme, buying up distressed land cheap by manufacturing the distress first, sabotaging water rights, calling in fake debts, forcing families out so he could buy the mineral rights underneath for nothing. I tried to warn the families he was targeting. He ran me out of town for it, had men waiting for me on the road. That's where I got this. He touched the scar above his eyebrow. I've been trying to forget Cresswell ever since. I never imagined it would follow me here. "Why didn't you tell me this when you got back?" I demanded. "Because I didn't know it had followed me here," Jesse said. "Lizzie, I swear to you, I didn't put this together until right now. But..." He stopped. "But what?" "But Reed had a partner," Jesse said slowly, the pieces visibly assembling behind his eyes. "A man who handled the legitimate-looking transactions, found the families, made the friendly offers, while Reed did the dirty work underneath.
I never learned his name. I never saw his face. He stayed in the shadows on purpose. We looked at each other in the dark, and I think we both arrived at Thomas Whitfield's name in the same breath, neither of us willing to say it first, because saying it made it real. I need to see that lien filing, tonight, before your father signs another piece of paper. It's a 2-day ride to the county seat. Then we ride through the night. Lizzie, if I'm right about this, your father isn't being saved by this marriage. He's being robbed by it, and you're the price. I should tell you here that everything in me, every lesson about propriety, about a promised woman's place, about what was and wasn't allowed, screamed that I shouldn't go. That riding through the night, alone, with a man who wasn't my fiancé 6 days before my wedding, was the kind of decision that ruins a woman's name in a county this small. I went anyway, because some decisions you make with your reputation, and some you make with the only honest thing left in your chest.
We didn't speak much on that ride. There wasn't room in either of us for words, only the rhythm of hooves on hard-packed earth, the white blur of moonlit prairie sliding past, and the particular silence of two people who just admitted, without saying it outright, that everything they thought they understood about their lives was about to come apart. We reached the county seat by mid-morning, exhausted, dust-caked, and went straight to the recorder's office. It took an hour of searching through filing books that smelled of must and old ink before the clerk found it, the incorporation papers for Cresswell Mineral and Land, filed 11 months prior. The signature at the bottom, witnessed and notarized, read Thomas A. Whitfield. I stared at that signature so long, the letters stopped looking like words. "There's something else," the clerk said, flipping further into the file. "A second document, filed 3 months back, a transfer agreement. Upon completion of a certain marriage," he glanced at me, uncomfortable, "full mineral and water rights to the Calloway parcel transfer automatically to Cresswell Mineral and Land, regardless of the disposition of the original Whitfield family note." I felt the floor of my whole life tilt sideways. It hadn't been a marriage at all. It had been a foreclosure dressed up in a wedding gown. Thomas never intended to save my father's ranch. He intended to own it outright the moment I said I do. The note forgiveness nothing but a kindness for show, while the real theft happened underneath, in language designed never to be read by anyone who trusted him. "I have to get back. We have to tell my father, tonight." "Lizzie." Jesse's voice stopped me at the door. When I turned, his face held something I hadn't let myself hope for. Not triumph, not even relief, but a kind of terrified, fragile honesty. "When this is over, when your father knows the truth and this wedding doesn't happen, I need you to know something. I'm not telling you this to win anything from you. I need you to know it regardless of what you decide to do with it. I have loved you since I was 13 years old and didn't have a word large enough for what I was feeling, so I called it not wanting you to drown. I've loved you in every town I worked in those 6 years, every letter I started and burned because I didn't trust myself not to ruin your life by sending it. I came back to this valley telling myself I'd guard that feeling and never let it cost you anything. I have failed at that every single day since April." I didn't answer him, not because I didn't feel the same, God help me, I did, with my whole cracked open heart, but because there was no time. We had a 2-day ride and 6 days to a wedding that could not, under any circumstance, be allowed to happen. We made it back in a day and a half, riding until our horses were lathered and our own bodies past exhaustion. We were too late by exactly 1 hour. My father was in the study with Thomas Whitfield when we burst through the door, both of us filthy from the road, and the look on Thomas's face told me everything before a single word was spoken. He knew. The moment he saw us together, dust-covered and breathless, and unified in a way no fiancé wants to see, he knew exactly what we'd found. "Father, don't sign anything," I said, my voice raw. "Whatever he's brought you, don't sign it." My father looked between us, confused, a half-finished document under his pen. "Lizzie, what in God's name?" "He's been robbing us, Father." I crossed the room and laid the copied filings on the desk, the incorporation papers, the transfer agreement, all of it. Cresswell Mineral and Land. It's his. The lien on our water rights, the debt that's been crushing us all spring, he engineered. The marriage was never going to save this ranch. It was the mechanism to steal it. My father read in silence, his face going through disbelief, then comprehension, then a rage I had only seen in him once before, the day my mother died. Cresswell, to his credit, or perhaps his shame, didn't bother denying it once the papers were in front of him. Something in his expression simply collapsed, the practiced charm sliding off like paint in rain. "It was never personal, Eliza," he said, "and somehow that was worse than an apology would have been. Your valley has 6 ranches sitting on land my father's operation needs. Yours was simply the easiest to acquire. You should be flattered. I chose persuasion over force. Reed wanted to ruin you outright. I thought marrying you was kinder." "Kinder," I repeated, and something in me went very cold and very clear. "You thought stealing my father's whole life's work through a wedding was kinder than stealing it through a foreclosure." "Get off my land," my father said, in a voice I'd never heard him use before, low and absolutely final. Thomas left. The engagement was over before the door finished swinging shut behind him. But here's the thing about exposing a man like Thomas Whitfield 3 days before a wedding. It doesn't simply erase the damage already done. The lien was still real. The debt was still real. My father's ranch was still standing on ground that could, in theory, still be seized, because Cresswell Mineral and Land hadn't vanished just because its true owner had been unmasked. Cornelius Whitfield, Thomas's father, controlled enough of the county's banking influence to make the next 6 months very difficult for us regardless of his son's disgrace. We had won the battle in that study. The war over my father's land was far from finished. That's the part nobody puts in the songs about frontier justice, that exposing the villain doesn't pay the debt. Somebody still has to find a way to actually save the ranch. It was Jesse who solved it, in the end, in a way I never saw coming. 3 days after Thomas left, Jesse asked to speak with my father privately. I wasn't in the room, but I learned afterward what was said, and it changed everything I thought I understood about the quiet, careful man who'd been sleeping in our bunkhouse all spring. Jesse had spent those 6 wandering years doing more than running cattle and breaking horses. The copper claim in New Mexico territory, the one that had nearly killed him, the one connected to his trouble in Cresswell, had in fact paid out. Not a fortune by Eastern standards, but enough. Enough that Jesse Coltrane, the hired hand sleeping in our bunkhouse, had nearly $4,000 sitting in a bank in Santa Fe he'd never once spent, never once mentioned, because, as he told my father, money had never once felt like it was his to enjoy. It felt like the last piece of a life his family had lost, and he hadn't known what to do with it except let it sit, untouched, like a wound he wasn't ready to look at. He offered every dollar of it to clear my father's note, not as a loan, not as a transaction, as a gift, freely given, with no condition attached except one, which he insisted my father refuse if it felt like one condition too many. "I'm not doing this to buy anything from your daughter," Jesse told him. My father repeated these words to me with tears standing plain in his eyes. "Your daughter decides whatever she wants about her own heart, with or without my money in your account. I'm doing this because your family pulled mine out of worse holes than this one, more than once, back before the drought took everything. I'm doing this because I have spent 6 years carrying money that felt like ash in my hands, and I would rather it become something that keeps the only family I've ever truly belonged to from losing their home. That's all. No conditions. I swear it. My father wept. I'm told he wept like he hadn't since my mother passed. The debt was cleared within the week, the lien, with Thomas's scheme exposed, and Cresswell Mineral and Land's true ownership a matter of public county record, collapsed under its own fraudulent weight. Ezra Pruitt saw to that personally, writing to the Territorial Land Office himself to file the necessary challenges. The ranch was saved. And 6 days later, on a morning that smelled like rain that hadn't fallen yet, I stood on my father's porch in a dress that for the first time in months was entirely mine to choose, and I walked out to the man kneeling behind the barn, fixing a wheel that didn't need fixing. You already know what happened next. I told you at the start. I said, "Whoever marries you will be lucky." He said, "I was hoping it would be you." What I didn't tell you is what happened after, because that morning wasn't actually my wedding day. It was 3 weeks before it. The morning everything between Jesse and I finally became something neither of us was brave enough to hide anymore. He stood up from that wheel he didn't need to fix, crossed the dirt between us in 4 long strides, and took my face in 2 hands that were rough from 6 years of hard work and gentle in a way I'd never once doubted. "I have loved you since I was 13 years old," he said, "and I am done pretending otherwise for one more day of my life. Eliza May Calloway, would you do me the honor of letting me spend the rest of mine making up for every year I wasted not telling you so?" I said yes before he'd even finished the question. We were married on a clear morning in August, under the same cottonwoods we'd built forts in as children, my father walking me down an aisle made of wildflowers, Ezra Pruitt standing as a witness with tears he didn't bother hiding. There was no Whitfield fortune involved, no debt forgiveness disguised as affection, no lien hidden in language designed to deceive. Just a ranch we'd saved with our own hands, and a love that had survived a river, a drought, 6 years of silence, a stampede, and a scheme designed to take everything from us both. Cornelius Whitfield's banking influence took a serious blow once his son's fraud became public record across 3 counties. Turns out a county doesn't forgive a man for trying to steal a bride along with her family's land. Thomas left the territory entirely within the year. I never learned where he went, and I confess I never once wondered. It's been 11 years since that morning behind the barn. I'm writing this, telling you this, from the porch of the same house, watching our 2 children chase each other through grass that's never once gone dry on us since, because Jesse, it turns out, has an instinct for water management that borders on the supernatural. My father lived to see both his grandchildren born before he passed peaceful in his sleep, in the house he built with my mother, on land he never had to lose. Jesse still doesn't say much, but what he says, he still means down to the bone. If there's a single thing I'd want you to carry away from our story, it's this. The frontier teaches you that survival and love aren't always the same choice, but every so often, if you're patient, if you're honest, if you're willing to ride through the night when the truth needs finding, they turn out to be exactly the same thing after all.